re-upload it?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, for our presentation before we start, we have verses, and so if anyone would feel comfortable reading them, that would be super awesome.
If not, we can read them.
If not, but get involved. Awesome. Take one, anyone. Awesome. Oh, you're good?
I'm getting in right.
I can read my rank.
Carlin, awesome. Well, on this one, you're great. Look at the back row, helping out.
Are you in the Zoom room right now?
I am not, but I think Emily's connecting to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you're in, Emily.
Oh, good.
I don't know. Yeah, you
Should
start
be
there.
able
You can start.
You start.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Working?
Hey, Isaac. That's fine.
No, he's listening.
I'm glad.
Hello. Yeah. Where he gets careless with his words and his son ends up finding it's working now.
Based on the output of the whole
Oh,
nation.
sure.
There you go.
Go in.
Hey.
Smart. Yeah. Sweet.
Are we ready?
I think as soon as Emily
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
puts that there.
Okay. Here we go. Hi, my name's Evan,
I'm Maggie.
I'm Emily.
and as you can see, we're obviously presenting on a theology of politics today.
So we decided to choose this topic, one, because obviously we're in the middle of an election still, and a lot of us have just become of age to vote. Obviously this is something that's impacting every single one of our lives, and as we know, if anything that affects each of our lives, we need to be able to ask the question as Christians, okay, so this is part of my life, how do I approach it, what do I need to do with it? So we're here to kind of address that question.
Yeah, so the thesis statement we have is, since politics is the arena in our current world that makes decisions and affects the lives of individuals, Christians are involved in politics to faithfully love and serve God and His children. So kind of like we said, I think it's just really important that we know how to love and serve others in this realm of politics. So first we wanted to look at what actually is politics. And the definition we came up with is the art or science concerned with guiding or influencing governmental policy.
So in order to influence or be a part of this society as an American citizen, and if we want to influence anything at all, we need to understand our government. So you probably already heard this in high school government, but we're going to refresh you. So there's three branches of government. You got the legislative, executive, and the judicial. We're not just a pure democracy. I feel like that's pretty evident right now. We're more commonly known, or better said, as a constitutional republic, so we elect representatives. As we can see, as long as it's taken for us to vote on this one election, it would not be beneficial for us to vote on every single policy all as a country. So we elect representatives, and then those representatives vote. And finally, even though it was not in the Constitution, political parties are a very real thing, and they are influencing politics in every way. So we need to be aware of them. We need to be educated on their stances and beliefs and how it compares to the Bible in order to function within them.
Nice. Yeah, all that stuff's important to know, primarily because we are able as citizens to directly influence the system of government itself. Not everyone in the world can do that. We are kind of fortunate. We can vote. We can do things like running for office. But yeah, the four main areas we have here. First one, running for office. This is a pretty big privilege. Sometimes there's age restrictions or minimum age requirements. So for the office of president, it would be 35 years of age. You have to be born in the United States and have lived here for 14 years. But for running for office is a pretty big deal. In certain countries, that's not a privilege that you get. So that's one big thing. That's one area we can influence. The second would be voting. This one's probably the simplest. And we hopefully, I don't know if you all are of age to vote, but possibly. If not, you just missed it. Voting, the age requirement is 18 years of age in the United States, and it's just one of the ways that we can get our voice out there. We can make it clear how we feel about certain issues. And the next one would be protesting. And this one's kind of controversial. Unfortunately, there are multiple ways to protest, and the ones that we have seen more recently have been negative and violent. But if done peacefully, it is actually a really great way that we can make a stand, and we can communicate our beliefs. And those elected officials that we vote into office, or if we become one, we can communicate to them in a large showing how we feel about stuff. And then lastly, volunteering. This one's pretty easy, but you can volunteer at the local government level, the federal government level, basically giving your time, glorifying the Lord, working for others in the realm of government.
Yeah, so now we want to talk about what do politics have to do with ministry. So we said that the government is the system that affects freedom, liberty, justice, and the well-being of all the people here. And so, as Christians, it's super important that we remember these things. God has created all of his children, and he has made each of them in his image, and he loves each of them. And so as his children, we should be doing the same, and we should be fighting for other people's freedom and liberty and justice. So, yeah, that's one point that we thought was really important.
Yeah, and building off of that, what Emily said, God does care about how Christians interact with rulers and the authorities. We're going to explore that a little bit later in some of the Bible passages that we're going to talk about. But there is this implied interaction between Christians and government. It's assumed that we're not removing ourselves from interacting with the secular world, and especially government. We're told to do things in relation to government. So having that in mind, we have to learn how to engage with the current government or the earthly kingdom that is in place without compromising our hope in the heavenly kingdom, which is going to be coming, hopefully at some point soon, but it's going to last forever. So finding a way to engage with both and not compromise our hope in the ultimate one.
So a great quote that we found that's going to draw together a succinct sort of understanding of why ministry is involved with politics is, politics provides Christians with an opportunity to actively love our neighbors through advocacy, policy making, and civic representation. To refuse to engage in politics is to refuse to take advantage of a useful tool for God's work. This is an opportunity that we have to serve God's people. We need to take advantage of it. All right, so the verses, we're going to start with Romans 13.
I don't think anyone's reading that one.
No, we're going to read this one because it's a little longer.
Sorry
so.
about the little communication error there. But yeah, do you want to read it or would you like me to?
You got it.
All right. So Romans 13, 1 through 7 says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." Repetition is important there. It's pointing out something important. We're going to skip down to verse 4. It says, "For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore it is necessary to submit to authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, who give their full time to governing. So give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If it's revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor."
Yeah, so just going off of that, first and foremost, God is the ultimate authority, and so we need to remember that aside from other leaders. But at the same time, God has placed different leaders in authority, and he has chosen those people to give them power. And so we need to remember to be respectful and loving and to trust God with that plan that he has placed those people there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we see that in verse 4, Paul's actually qualifying the type of government that we're supposed to submit to. We're not just supposed to submit to any old government, because a lot of people ask this question, like, what if I have a tyrannical dictator who is persecuting us as Christians? Like, what do? We just submit to him? But that's not the case at all, because in verse 4 it says, "For the one in authority is God's servant for your good." So Paul is assuming that the government is being put in place by God to provide peace and stability and to do good. And it's supposed to be a servant to you. It's supposed to be serving the Lord and keeping order. So for us, we have to, as believers, when governments fail to do these things, we no longer have to submit to them. That's kind of a big implication of what's going on here. But as long as we are constantly analyzing the government that's in place and seeing if it is doing the Lord's good work, then we should be submitting if we find that that's the truth. But if it's a tyrannical dictator, there's a situation here where this verse actually gives us the right to not submit any longer. Okay, I believe we're going to continue looking at another passage. Is anyone reading Matthew 22? Yes.
Yeah, all right. "Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, Whose image is this, and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, So give back to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's.
Yeah, so what we kind of understood from this passage is that, well, we should be paying taxes and we should follow rules, but all of this is under the umbrella of rendering what is God to God. So making sure that we should fulfill our civic duties, but under God's ruling.
Okay, I believe the next verse is Jeremiah 29:7.
Yeah, I got it.
Yes. Let's go, Carl.
Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper.
Yeah, so this is, we're kind of looking at this idea that we are not, as Christians, immune to the world around us, and that's vice versa. That if we seek, that's that active verb it starts with, we need to seek peace and prosperity. Then if we seek that for the world around us, they're going to be affected by that, and ultimately we will as well. This is not this is the idea of passive versus active, and why we need to be involved in politics. We can't just sit here and be like, oh, it's a bummer that things are so bad, but someday I'll get to heaven and it'll be okay. He's saying, no, you need to seek it, peace and prosperity for those around you, because that will ultimately affect you as well.
Awesome.
All right, so our last verse is going to be Genesis 3:6, which I really do.
Yeah. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it.
Awesome. Thank you. So some of you may be looking at this verse and saying, like, what on earth does this have to do with politics? But I swear it does. I swear it's important. It's actually probably the biggest and most important key to our understanding about the problem with government and politics in this world. Some of you may think that the solution to the problem with government and politics is getting the right laws passed or voting the right guy into office. If I can just get my guy in, we're going to start winning as Christians. We're going to start putting the right laws in that are going to glorify God. But that's not the case at all, and we see that here. The real problem with America specifically, and as well as most other governments in the world, is at its core a heart problem. We see that Adam and Eve introduced a hard heart to the world, one that does not love the Lord, the one that doesn't love its neighbor, and one that cannot be changed by legislation. I think this is the biggest key. We get an amazing example in the Old Testament with the Israelites. They had 613, I believe is the number of commandments that they received from the Lord. And throughout that entire period of time, they were unfaithful. They still loved idols, and their hearts were hard. Moses even predicted it, I believe, in Deuteronomy 23. But he predicted that they were going to turn away from the Lord and continue to worship their idols. Their hearts were not changed by legislation. So no amount of laws, no right ruler that we vote in is going to make us win in that sense. The idea of like, oh, we got to win by voting this guy in is not the case. The only time we win is right up here. It says we only win when repentance and forgiveness happens in the name of the Lord as we join the family of Christ. So as hard-hearted people in the world start realizing that they have hard hearts and they start repenting, that's when we start to win as Christians. So the solution then is to change your heart. And that's not an action from us, but that's from the Lord.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we actually listened to a podcast, and one of the things that was said was, you may be cynical about politics, but do not be cynical of the gospel and the power of God to transform the world, which we just thought was super important and kind of goes into everything that we've been saying. So, yeah. Okay, it's lagging, sorry. Oh, or did I go too forward?
Uh-oh.
What's happening? Sorry,
Oh,
everyone.
there
There we go. Okay,
Yay.
perfect. Now we're going to talk about how politics are viewed in various ministries.
Yeah, so the first one, as you can all see, is complete segregation. And this is the view that either the church or the believer themselves is going to remove themselves entirely and not involve themselves with politics at all. This comes from the idea that, the system's corrupt or it's sinful and we should not taint ourselves by being near it. So typically this comes with that idea, and Christians will remove themselves, or an entire church will just remove themselves and not deal with politics at all.
Yeah. Continuing on that spectrum, the next one is going to be individual advocates. So individual church members act in politics based on their own beliefs. So we kind of see this could be as maybe Christians generally agree on like the function of everyone is created equally. but people in the church would disagree on how that should be worked out, and so one person may go and protest or do something that their fellow member of the church would not. We all know this. You don't talk to your church and then commit all as one who you're voting for. That's not something that happens. You vote individually based on your convictions. So this is moving along that spectrum.
So the next on the spectrum would be church advocacy, and this is when communities of churches join together to fight and advocate for various political beliefs. So this is kind of going back to what we learned earlier in the semester about form and function. And so the function of this would be an absolute, and something such as abortion, where all church members are probably around the same belief system in this, and so they could then go out and protest or do whatever they want really with this belief, but they are united as a church body.
Right, and on the complete end of the other spectrum, we see complete allyship, which means that churches ally and fully partner with political groups or people or parties to show their support. An example of this would be Billy Graham, and he, at the sort of height of his biblical campaign sort of thing in America, actually cited and endorsed the Nixon campaign, which led a lot of other Christians to join and support them, but that didn't end up working out when Nixon kind of fell from respect and a lot of scandals came out. And so that negatively impacted the church. So as we see, there's negatives and positives, along this spectrum, but pointing to the allyship, we cannot be completely allied with anyone except Jesus Christ, because no side of the political party has it right, no person has it right, because we're all sinners. And so that's the only person we're going to fully ally with, and we need to keep that in mind. To sum all this up, another great quote is, if the Great Commission becomes secondary, or if Christianity is understood primarily as a means of accomplishing social or political goals, we've handed to Caesar what belongs to God. That needs to be kept in mind.
That's awesome. Okay, lastly, we're just going to look at some ways that we should engage with politics as Christians. The first big one is placing your hope in God and not in politics. And this kind of harkens back to Genesis 3:6 and what we talked about there. How there is no law, there's no right or wrong legislation, and there's no guy that we can vote into office that is going to deliver us or offer us salvation. In that sense, Psalm 146 really speaks to this really well. It's the first of the last 5 praise psalms in the book. And right in the middle, there's a break in the structure where it says, "Do not put your trust in princes." And it talks about how when they breathe their last, they will pass away and go into the earth, and their plans are futile. But the Lord, on the other hand, his kingdom is eternal, his justice is perfect in righteousness. So for us as Christians, we need to remember that laws and the right leaders that we vote in, those aren't going to be the things that deliver us. So as we engage with politics, as we vote, as we protest, we have to place our hope in the Lord and not in government to save us.
Next up, we need to be praying for our leaders. In 1 Timothy 2:1-6, it talks about this, that encourages us to pray for those in charge. One, because this is pleasing to the Lord. It's also an act of love and service. We know there are so many places in the Bible where it talks about, not worrying about anything, but offering up your requests to God through prayer. And so we know that those people in charge, we talked about earlier how they're placed there by God, but they're also humans, and they're also in need of prayer. And we need to be humble enough to pray for those people, even if we're like, oh no, God will never change them, or they're awful people. Well, then that's more points to your own struggle of faith, because you need to believe in God's redemptive power and what he can do to change the hearts of people.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, also we should be praying for our neighbors as well through all of this. We shouldn't be praying that they would change their political views or who they're voting for or whatever, but we should be praying for that change of heart, and that they would repent, and that they would ultimately trust God and his plan in all of this craziness. To continue this, we should work to love and serve. And we can use the areas available and ethical to advance and advocate for God's truth. And this is kind of going off of Galatians 5:13, where we have been given the freedom to serve one another, and we should love them through that.
Right. And the last thing is, we are not supposed to passively accept injustice, which is very the Bible where we see people protesting, examples of godly people standing up for what's right, starting off with Jesus. When they went into the temple and they saw the injustices going on there, Jesus didn't say, "That's a bummer, I wish they would stop doing that. Oh, that's so wrong." Or like, "Yeah, that's wrong, but I wish, like, I just want everyone to be happy and I don't want anyone to get upset, so I'm not going to do anything." No, he turned tables because it was unjust and that needed to be ended. And we look at Daniel and his friends, this, personal protesting of, "I'm not going to eat something that's going to defile me." And then, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Nebuchadnezzar was like, "Wow, won't you bow to the chocolate bunny?" And they didn't. That again was a form of, I'm not going to defile myself, I'm going to honor God through this protest. And through the decisions and actions that I have as a Christian in politics.
Awesome. Yeah, and so that's basically it. That's our theology of politics. But as this season is still going on, we just want to encourage you to think about what's been shared and to wrestle with it. It's a really weird time, as you all know. We don't really know who's getting voted into office or what laws are fully passed yet. So as you engage, it's too late to vote now, but as you engage, so whether or not you protest or you volunteer or however you're going to engage yourself with politics in this earthly kingdom, make sure that you're placing your hope in the Lord. So because whoever gets voted in, the Lord is still king and he's still in charge. And it's really at its core a heart problem. It's not a problem of getting the right guy or the right gal into office. So yeah, just in this time, wrestle with those things, place your hope in the Lord, and you guys should be good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both teams, and so we'll see everybody on Monday for our next round of presentations. Thank you, Ramon.
Wow!
If we bring our own table to a protest, can we put that?
Yes.
Come,
As long as your
everybody.
hope is in the Lord.
All right. So I can't set dumpsters on fire, but I can flip my own table.
It depends.
They didn't really address Molotov cocktails. They really
I know, I'm sorry. In the whole political